Okay. Could you say and spell your name, please?
Ann Fabian, Annfabian.
Great. So, as a start, would you just give me an autobiographical sketch of, and it can be as elaborate or not as you'd like, but your kind of your engagements with higher education, the institutions or the kinds of institutions that you've inhabited and the kinds of positions that you've held up to where you are now.
Okay. I grew up in Southern California, post-war kid, big family. Parents wanted us all to go to UC. My father's idea was that he paid taxes and that UC was great. I went to Santa Cruz, which seemed it seemed beautiful to me, physically beautiful. I was a philosophy major, since I decided that if one was in college, one had to study the things that a university was about. And my parents were both lawyers. I met at one point the father of a friend who taught French at Pasadena City College. I found this fascinating. I found the idea that one could live off of a kind of intellectual project really wonderful. When I finished as an undergraduate, I decided I actually couldn't go to graduate school in philosophy because I couldn't figure out how to keep my feet on the ground doing that. I had a friend who had gone on to get a PhD in American Studies at Yale. I decided, okay, that sounds fine to me. So I did that as well. And as a graduate student in the late 70s in American Studies, one was caught pretty plainly between a kind of theoretical turn in literature programs and the sort of first power and then dwindling of what social history was doing in history departments. And I think, like a lot of us in American Studies, we were in classes with students in English who would sort of look down on us, and with students in history who would look down on us for a different set of reasons. And I watched most of my contemporaries, colleagues, and brilliant good friends sort of leap onto the safe barge of jobs in English departments or jobs in history departments. And also a lot of them, I think probably more than half of them, brilliant and promising as they were, actually went on to do other things. At that point, law school was still an option. So, as a wonderful friend said to me at once, I decided not to pull a Vietnam with my graduate career. I'm not throwing in any more good troops. So that happened pretty often. I started out as a junior faculty member at Yale, sort of balancing a career of my husband and children, and commuting from various places, and teaching there. Then I, like a lot of junior faculty at that point, I didn't get tenure at Yale, so then I kicked around for a little bit, teaching graduate courses at CUNY and at Columbia, which was very nice, finishing a second book, and then I started teaching at Rutgers and taught there in American Studies and History, became the Dean of Humanities for 4 years, and then left the Dean's office, in part because we'll talk about this, by what I was thinking about higher education and what was happening with it in a big public university, and moved my line into the history department, where I still am.
Okay.
I was also chair of American Studies for a while at Rutgers. I forgot that piece. Mm-hmm. Is that enough?
That's great.
Okay.
So let's maybe start in a general way, and then I want to talk about those dean years especially. Okay. But in a general way, you hear this. As I was interviewing Andrew Ross the other day, and he said, we used to talk around the water cooler about our books and our ideas, and now we talk about our institutions. And there's real truth to that. Yeah. And I'm just wondering, kind of in that long arc that you just described, what is your experience of this kind of, maybe at one level the change itself or the changes, but at another level just the sense of change that is pervading American educational institutions?
I think it's, to use a sort of tired metaphor, there's a sort of perfect storm of things that are happening. And one is there was a really interesting interview with Rick Levin a couple weeks ago about the universities are now going to be measured by the number of students they teach. And this is sort of looking beyond the MOOCs. I mean, I think the MOOCs set up one set of questions about numbers, but they actually failed, not physically and not numbers, but they failed because they weren't conceived exactly pedagogically. They were just about numbers. I think that quantification, that push toward quantification, is scattered in a whole lot of different places. So one would be the place, first, I mean, I think you're insulated from this at Yale in a lot of ways, but the rest of us who have to pay heed to middle states and work through a whole pattern of assessments are about numbers there. So you're going to talk about the number of students that fulfilled X learning goal or Y learning goal. The other thing is the way university budgeting models have started to work, whether you call it responsible centered management or all funds budgeting, at least remotely seem to count out things by butts in seats. So though no one has yet said your funding will be absolutely dependent on tuition dollars on a departmental level, that's existing on a unit-to-unit level, which does a funny kind of transformation of cooperation into a kind of competition, both for student eyes or student bodies, which quickly become tuition dollars. Okay, that's quantification pattern 1 or 2. There's another one that's going on, which is now universities assessing themselves by not just years to graduation, one thing, but how much money your students are making, 20 years out or 40 years out, so that becomes a quantifiable measure. So that all of these things are pushing away, like Andrew's conversation around the water cooler about an exchange of ideas now becomes an idea about competition or numbers. How are you going to get more students to do this or that? I think it works across in different ways. Like we have to have a climbing wall so our applications will go up. So it's there on the enrollment side of things. But it's everywhere, and it's really astonishing. At a place like Rutgers, as one former head dean said, it's about mass education. What she meant by that was a little complicated, but I think to some extent that's kind of where we are, and that's doing one thing. I mean, you've taught graduate students a lot, as have I, and I felt the crisis kind of acutely, not last summer, but the summer before when I was teaching a nuts and bolts 19th century graduate course in history. And I was really stunned by, it was really about, reading books and thinking critically about these books and thinking about where your own project might sit in a set of ideas and what conversations you wanted to engage. And I thought, oh my God, I don't know what kind of a world they're going to walk into. And I don't know if they're going to have the luxury of that exchange that's all about, here's my idea. So, the course was also a lot about teaching. How do you put together a set of model courses that incorporate both new materials and new methods? And that I could sort of ground it in that more practical thing. Okay, here's, a model syllabus that functions as a hybrid, that does these models of assignments that are training the students to do something else. So I'm going to say one more thing. That our numbers at a place like Rutgers, in history and in the humanities more broadly, and in American studies, as the conversation goes, have plummeted. They've also plummeted partly locally because of the way the core curriculum works, but also because of what's happened to teachers. Some of my best students at Rutgers, and they are a fantastic group of kids to teach in a lot of ways, have gone on to be middle school and high school teachers in the social sciences and humanities. And they were often really proud of that. So I would be teaching I remember teaching Imani Perry's book. Imani had been an undergraduate that I taught at Yale. And it's a tough book. But as soon as I said
this is the one on law?
No, the new one.
Oh, okay.
More terrible and more beautiful.
Oh, right, okay.
So, I said to the students, okay, you have to teach this to your freshmen in high school, the ideas that are here. It transformed this seminar, and all of a sudden they could just take these ideas and say, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Okay, 2 things have happened with that. I just want to say that my teacher students are now being pushed by a set of kind of pre-professional pre-professional conversations going on around their dinner tables to be ed majors. So rather than being American Studies majors and going into a 5-year program that gets them a teaching credential at the end, they need to promise their parents, they need to promise their parents that they are doing something practical from the get-go. So they're becoming, instead of becoming the humanities majors that then fuel them into being teachers, they're taking this other route. Anyway, there,
right.
All my numbers.
No, well, that's very interesting. I mean, one of the things, there's a lot packed in there to what you just said, but I mean, I guess one of the questions is, what is driving that new kind of pragmatism? Is that being driven by the institutions themselves, or is it the momentum of the culture, so that it is actually coming from parents?
It's the momentum of the culture. I mean, I'm going to guess that. I think the institutions are not driving that. The institutions, I think, are on the receiving end of it. And so, I mean, I guess that's the kind of thing that, I'll go back to Andrew's water cooler conversation, which now appears as a luxury. Why are we thinking that? Why does the humanities appear as a luxury? Why?
Right. Which is one of the ways that Yale is more part of that world that you're describing than you might think, because although the institution itself might not be driven by numbers as much as a large state institution is, you still get that in terms of the conversation about the humanities. And certainly one of the reasons that American Studies is kind of flourishing, or is allowed to flourish at Yale, is because our majors have been pretty stable. We tanked a little bit out right after 9/11, but those numbers are back up to where they were in the 90s, and that unit kind of gets rewarded for that. But it's a numbers.
It's a numbers thing, yeah. So, but you need to have. I mean, I used to think about this a lot when I was in the dean's office, which is you need to be able to have a class, Petrock or whatever, that has 3 students in it because they've been Italian majors and they've worked super hard. That we held that together for a little while, but that's gone now. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're saying, okay, you've got to cancel this class if it has only 3. But it's actually just the opposite. I've been a philosophy major. I need to take this seminar on the philosophy of language, and I need to be in this class with 6 people. This is what I've worked for all this time. But instead, the sort of push is to say we can't afford that anymore. Right. So, it's okay, numbers are okay, but they also, I think what's happening right now, and people have said this, that there have been, sort of cyclical moves within universities and majors, but this feels different for some reason. This feels like a kind of transformation. I mean, I sometimes think of it like a French, where's the next generation of French horn players? Somehow we always seem to produce French horn players. I don't know. See, the other thing that I used to do when I was first at Rutgers, I used to try really hard to teach these courses on curiosity. I still do that sometimes. These honor seminars and freshman seminars on curiosity, because my students didn't feel entitled to be curious. This is really the striking thing about the difference between the Yale students, which include my kids, that they were kind of brought up to be curious and to indulge their curiosity. And a lot of my students felt like to indulge their curiosity was not what they were there for. They were there for certain kinds of practical things, to get a set of skills.
Curiosity could take you away from the main game in town.
Yeah, it could take you off on a meander. And they really, because a lot of them are working. I mean, that's the other side. A lot of them are working their way, not on work-study jobs, but on the loading dock at UPS or at the bar overnight. And they work more than 30 hours a week. And so you say, and that's partly driven by rising tuition costs, so they're going to have to cut into that cost. And so I think these things are all weaving together to be of a sort of practical side to things. And until we can figure out a way to say that curiosity, or the meander's the wrong word, the move through the humanities is itself serving a kind of a set of practical purposes about a cultivated imagination or reading and writing skills, that straight out skill set about reading and writing that is as important to master as any kind of engineering. But it doesn't, what does it promise as pay at the other end? And you can do a lot of pious speeches. I'm on the board of the ACLS, we think about these things a lot, and try to find the language to use it. And they're, Mellon has good language, but the language is not our purchase here. You can get examples of, blah, blah, blah at IBM who was a dance major and blah, blah, blah who was this. But those examples are not what cuts this. Have you talked to Chris Newfield, by the way?
Not yet, but I will.
Okay.
I will.
Okay. Chris inspires me.
Yes. Well, and by the way, I mean, I'm sure you know this, he's actually thinking of higher education studies as a whole new field, which it does seem to be. So you described this really vivid kind of classroom moment of realizing that you need to kind of outfit your students in a different way than you had been. In terms of this numbers game that we're talking about and the shift away from ideas and towards numbers and assessments and all of that, are there other moments, maybe administrative moments, that you would point to where, like, when did this recognition kind of dawn for you, or how did it dawn for you that the university was actually shifting under your feet?
I think I went into the dean's office. When was this? In 2008, I think. So right after the economic crisis. And so there were a series of conversations, both with Ziva Galili, who was the sort of acting executive dean. I'm fascinated by university administration because they're all different. They're all wrinkled out in these slightly different ways. So I had probably a really amazing job. I was just basically the dean of the faculty in the humanities. Okay, so a couple things started to happen. Rutgers is perennially in crisis. If you ever talk to Jackson leaders, they'll tell you it goes through these crises. It partly because it has crises about its identity, it has crises about its funding, it has crises about its own location in New Jersey, it has crises about its administration. So part of what happens is that you can look at these charts in Michigan or wherever about what's happened to state funding. So that really happened in the crisis, following the financial crisis. So but there's a longer term shift, which is what is the university as a state project. And this is why I sort of started my story at that utopian University of California moment, which Ronald Reagan interrupted it in certain really specific ways, but it started out as an enormous set of kind of utopian promises of what does it mean to educate broadly this group of people. That's not the world that we have anymore. So as state funding, what happens is that if you're going to diminish state funding, there are two things that happen. One is a push toward federal grant money, which is its own kind of dubious promise about the way the overheads of federal grants are now circulated into the university budget. And the other one is tuition. So, we have a public university with a very small endowment. So it has dependent on, state funding. But in New Jersey, it's so complicated because the boasting rights have not traditionally gone to Rutgers. The boasting rights go to Princeton. And I think you find this in all of the public universities in the Northeast. So, State University of New York is not going to get the state's boasting rights in the same way that you have a much more equal world in North Carolina with, Duke and UNC, even Stanford and Berkeley as rivals and collaborators. So, I was watching a kind of evolution of a German department where UNC and Duke realized that they were better off kind of merging a German department because that UNC had real strength in German that Duke did not have. So they become a confederated department. It's never going to happen at Rutgers and Princeton, even though we may do things together. But so the boasting rights mean that Rutgers has often been, for logical reasons and not so logical reasons, not the boast of the legislature, but the sort of whipping boy of the legislature. So I think things are sort of better now, although now it's been the great integration of the medical school. But let me go back and say one thing really quickly about federal grants. So I remember talking when I was in the dean's office to the person who was the vice president for research, or whatever he was called, who was in charge of encouraging people to apply for the NIH grants. And so somebody got an NEH, and I was doing this NEH reading over the summer, and he was going, well, this is just small change, $5,500 for the summer, and there's no overhead. And we raised all this money from Mellon, but he's saying, that's no overhead, no contribution to the university's bottom line, so therefore it was really hard to get them to get boasting rights so both Mellon and the NEH do not contribute to the overhead on this sort of block of the multi-million-dollar medical school grant. So here you have the voice of the humanities sort of also diminished because it's not pulling weight in quite the same way. So go back to Chris Newfield's, one of Chris Newfield's eloquent arguments is actually that courses in the humanities actually pay for undergraduate courses in this, if you've seen, Chris's charts and numbers. But anyway, that's sort of my impression in the dean's office about this. And that everything became a kind of set of reporting quantifications. I mean, you look at numbers a lot. You look at enrollments a lot. You look at, majors and trends and the push toward making sure that they're big classes and that big classes are filled. And the, you can't, in the sort of practical, you sort of shoot yourself in the foot because you can't have all classes on Bruce Springsteen. Although there was a day back in the day that used to fill American Studies classes, but I don't think that's the future. Anyway, never mind. That was a meander.
Well, so there are a lot of different ways of conceptualizing this. You hear phrases like the corporate university or the entrepreneurial university. There are different ways of thinking about how to kind of get our minds around this.
They like the entrepreneurial metaphor. We see that one a lot.
Yeah, so can you just talk about kind of, I guess, I still want to come back to your dean's experience, but we'll put that off for a second. Conceptually, what is the best kind of model for thinking about what this is that we're seeing? And more importantly, what is in a general way, one of the things we're seeing is a kind of tug of war between pedagogues and business types, right? In some sense.
In some sense.
And
yeah.
so, what is the best kind of point of engagement? What's the most promising point of engagement for educators in this struggle? Is it faculties on the ground at institutions? Is it professional organizations like the AHA and the ASA and the OAH and ACLS? Where's the best way to put energy?
It's an interesting question. I think those organizations have a huge role to play, and I'm not exactly sure what it is. I had a really interesting talk with Jim Grossman at the ACLS meetings about what the AHA is doing, both about new forms of teaching and that sort of tuning project or whatever it's called, and how one teaches. Those meetings, you've been president of the ASA. I was on the council years ago, back in the day, before this change had taken place, when our luxury was both thinking critically, writing beautifully, and engaging both a public set of issues and our own students. Those seem to be the pieces of what I was doing. How do you teach students to think critically about the cultures in which they operate? How do you let them come to develop and articulate a set of values that are going to send them through their lives? I sound piously moral, but sort of opening eyes in a number of ways, from the practical things of, showing them their first Marx Brothers movies and making them think about why that's funny, enriching their world by watching how a set of references are constantly going back. Okay, that doesn't answer your question about the corporate university. I don't know enough about the imaginations of higher managers. One of the reasons why I left the dean's office is I felt like I was learning what I didn't want to learn anymore. I wasn't ever going to be able to turn this ship around. I could make my life, the life of my colleagues, better on a daily, monthly, or semester by semester basis, which had deep pleasures. But the institution itself, we were somewhat flying under the radar in the humanities, but the institution itself was caught up, I think, in a set of extremely, practical concerns. So one of the first, I can't remember what this woman's role was, the state of New Jersey embraced, following some of Obama's language, when Corzine was in the Senate, a program to do a kind of agreement with the community colleges, which was fine. It was a program called New Jersey Stars. They would take the top 10% of the graduating class, and if they enrolled in the community colleges, the county colleges, then they would go to Rutgers in their third year. This seems so sad to me. It's really difficult to criticize in any way what community colleges do, but to take the brightest undergraduates and to put them there first in one step from high school in a series of kind of remedial classes, rather than letting them loose in the weirdness of what a big research university was, seems so sad to me and wrongheaded. So one encounters that kind of wrongheadedness. So, how do you... I gave this talk to the Rutgers Phi Beta Kappa things. I had this inspiration about what their education... I should send you this talk. It's really funny, about what the higher education looked like at that point. That was in, I think, 2010 or 2011. I'll send it to you. It's great. It's about Moby Dick. It's about their education on a whale ship and what Rutgers meant. So sorry, I'm nattering on. I've tried really hard to give my students bragging rights. I wanted them to boast whatever they majored in. But the corporate university, yeah, that's exactly what's happened. That's exactly what happened. And how do we put the humanities into that game in the same way that business majors, or I think the drain on English departments at a place like Rutgers is the communications major, which is now sucking people into the journalism school. The business major, which used to be something you would go into as a sort of double major in your third year, which seemed like a lovely thing, now is a 4-year business major.
Right. History is losing out to policy studies of various sorts. Right.
Studies, yeah. So that's it. So, or some kind of cobbled together international relations at some place. Right. We don't have that, but that appears to be some kind of practical mode that promises a set of skills. I mean, this was, I think, what the AHA was doing with the tuning project which is, what are the skills that a history major has? What can an employer count on? So there we've adopted the corporate... Right,
and which is this kind of... There's a philosophical question about whether that's a win or a loss.
Yeah,
right?
I don't know. I mean, I don't think that... I mean, I hate to say this. I'm not sure that's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, but the other side is that the social sciences, which offer both harebrained and practical things. I'm not going to dump on my colleagues in the social side, but they appear, at least in the state of New Jersey, what have you done for the state? Why, I've studied the promises of bilingual education. So there's that,
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a logic in the state that's a little bit different than, I don't know.
So can you just say a little bit more about, in Rutgers and in New Jersey, who is it exactly who educators end up having to answer to?
Educators answer to. You answer to the Board of Governors, I suppose, ultimately, and you answer then to the... Rutgers has these multiple tiers of governance. You answer the president, which is its own set of issues. It sort of always has his face to the outside, fundraising, public relations, and then there's an internal governance structure that they've just altered. I think the president now, Robert Barchi, came on thinking that he would go and incorporate a medical school and forgot that he had to run a university on the side. And it caused some chaos, shall we say, in the beginning, that he forgot that he had a university to run. We'll see. We'll see what happens. He'll be there for a few more years, and they will swallow this medical school. But it's sort of all medicine right now, all the time. So our history is now, the medical humanities, and English is, the medical humanities, and history is the history of medicine. So we've all gotten with the program as though we'll come along on the tail end.
Mm-hmm.
The poetry of the body and medicine. It's all right. Get there. It's okay. Because they're the students. I mean, maybe that's a kind of seductive thing to get the students back, so they could say, "Well, I'm pre-med, but I'm taking this poetry course about medicine and poetry."
Mm-hmm.
Get them back. I don't know. what's driving it? I mean, do you feel this corporate push at Yale? It's always been a kind of corporate arm.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, the board, they call it the corporation, right? And they call they call the beginning of every semester shopping period.
Yeah,
so,
I know. There it is. But
you know.
you saw that. And when I saw that, even, yeah, so think about the ways in which student course evaluations work. They were critical consumers. I mean, we used to talk about that all the time. And I mean, Rutgers kids are less critical consumers, but that's there. Nevertheless, you know, but it's not shopping period in the same way. It's not, you know,
right.
It's ad drop.
Well, right, exactly. And I think even in the span of, I've been at Yale for almost 20 years now, and in that span, I think the real meaning of shopping period has changed from what was a kind of chaotic ad drop
it was chaotic
to something that has more bite to it, because I think tuition costs are prompting parents to put different kinds of pressures on their kids, to put different kinds of pressures on their professors to perform different kinds of things.
Like helicopter parents? I mean...
Well, I suppose it's, you know, but that, you know, getting your money's worth really is kind of driving a kind of conversation between parents and kids in a way that probably wasn't the case 20 years ago.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean,
Well, it is funny, because I mean, I'm taking my daughter now. I have a son who goes to Northwestern, and my daughter's a rising senior, so I've been taking her on the college tours. And at one of them, I won't name the institution, but the admissions officer who was giving the information session said, quite frankly, that their president's idea about improving the university was simply getting more people to apply to it. So he's really approaching education as a PR kind of project, and if twice, and obviously,
it's numbers.
And
it goes
it
back
is
to
numbers,
the numbers.
and you can see that there's a kind of perverse logic to that. That if twice as many people do apply to that school, it will become more selective, and it will be ranked higher, and it will be thought of as a better university than it is, and that's without changing a single thing on the ground.
Yeah, that's where there's a sort of quantification that this is what I'd love to talk to Chris Newfield about is. How do we understand the quantification of everything? I mean, I'm not opposed to assessment. I'm not opposed even to these numerical measurements, but they seem to be driving things in a different way. If you want to pinpoint about how the change has worked itself out, and I don't think anybody other than maybe you and maybe Chris has their mind around what the broader sense of quantification is all about. So that why does Rick Levin now say, I mean, you know, 2 years ago, I was at this Whiting meeting that Whiting was thinking about the different ways that it might use its funding. You know, at that point, we were all saying, okay, this is going to, you know, transform a lot of mediocre universities. They better, you know, get their acts together. Yale was behind, you know, what MIT and Harvard and Stanford were doing. So that Yale had to do some catching up. How we were going to position, you know, the Williamses and Amhersts of this world, and then what was going to happen to the big publics. And, you know, are you going to have a smaller faculty? Are you going to have faculty that are going to be, you know, glorified teaching assistants as people, you know, kind of interpret these MOOCs? San Jose State pushed back on Michael Sandel, I think, in a really interesting way, of an organized faculty who came to, and this is going back to your earlier question about, is this faculty on the ground, or is this, you know, the ASA or the OAH as an organized body? They pushed back, the philosophy department, and said, and Sandel listened to them. So this was really one model, and I think people are now trying to rethink how MOOCs don't work, or work for like 1% out of the millions of people who are supposedly enrolled in it. So we'll see what Levin does with the rethinking of Coursera. He's at Coursera, yeah. With the rethinking of what Coursera is going to do, because I think that there's another piece of a transformation here, which is a practical set of courses. We'll go back to the promise of a corporate university, or the corporation, arm in arm with the corporations for whom you're going to work. They'll start delivering these courses that are somewhat specialized, not as though they're tailor-made for Morgan Stanley or whoever you want to become a, you know, investment banker, but they're going to be tailor-made to do a set of skills, I think, that maybe are going to be complementary to, in competition with, or somehow along the side of what a university might do. So, that's where I think of our insecurities, that the changing grounds are there by a set of digitally driven things, by a set of economic considerations, by a set of uncertainties about the sort of the rising promise. I mean, that was the 1950s and 1960s models of the university. That was part of a general rising promise, that you bring in all the GIs, then you educate the children of the baby boom generation, and everything keeps rising. I think that the notion of infinite progress is now gone. Mm-hmm. We don't have that anymore. So the question is, and that there you could tweak that so you can diversify by class and race and first generation college, a place like Yale. When I started there, that diversity still wasn't there. The women's bathrooms were still down in the basement. There were, third and fourth generation boasters, and that wasn't there. It's gotten much, much more diverse, and therefore much more interesting, I think. If I look at sort of the world that my kids had, that was much so, but that still has that older model of a kind of rising promise. We'll educate the promising groups of the next generation, but there's a check on that promise that I think people are carrying around. So, but it's your other question, which is, where do you get a pitch on the answer? Is it the faculties? Have you been talking to people in their 30s, the sort of younger?
Not yet, although I will be.
Yeah, I would be really curious what it looks like for them, because they're still holding on to a piece of an older model. I got to write my book, publish my monograph, I'll get tenure, and then what does it look like? Those little things, those little steps are still there for them.
But knowing that there is a world somewhere on the horizon where there will be no books and there will be no tenure, all right?
Yeah, so that's the other side of this, is what I mean. So that's we could go the model of no tenure. That may happen, a series of long-term contracts, but these are like, the end of the monograph. These are these conversations. We've been having these conversations for years, When will tenure end? And, they propose it, and then there's a big, I don't think I don't know. Somebody might be able to get away with it pretty soon.
Mm-hmm. Well, there are instances of it being kind of chipped away at pretty aggressively, so we'll see.
We'll see. Yeah, there is. I think that's...
And on the front of the monograph, I mean, I was talking to the editor of major university press recently, who said he feels that he can't publish books in literature anymore.
Yeah, you see that a lot, and this is what the MLA has just come out with this. Then, I mean, Mellon is sort of like the heroic Dutch boy, has tried a lot to sort of put a finger in the dike to stop the erosion in a number of ways, and so I was on the board of Rutgers University Press for a long time. So, know many things, and so they were part of one of the Mellon projects of literary publication. And I sat on this Oxford University Press thing for a while, where they were going to try to get everybody's backlist and make another Oxford silo that they would put it everywhere. So they would have UNC's backlist and everybody's backlist, and it would become a kind of Oxford portal. That, I think the jury's out there still. I think you're right. We will soon have these digital research projects that are assessed as such, and ACLS has got a good hand in that. Stephen Barry's extraordinary project on CSI Dixie, if you've seen, which is an extraordinary digital project on coroner's inquests. But the question here is, how do you set up? We are so good at judging a monograph that the university presses now become an arm of a tenure committee, and you send it out, you get readers' reports. I think we'll set up a kind of mechanism that will allow a kind of, for the new forms of scholarly assessment.
Right. There's a group called Anvil Academic that has started to do that, to try to develop protocols for non-written kind of scholarly forms.
So the question is, who's going to break ranks first? And I think somebody will get promoted to full professor somewhere on those places.
On the basis of that kind of work.
Of that. I'm not, you have, Yale or Harvard or somebody has to tenure the first person. or North. I mean,
Right.
Rutgers is not going to take the lead of tenuring the first person. I mean, somebody at a kind of smaller regional college may do that. I mean, even a place like Colby that doesn't necessarily need a book for tenure will, but has other forms of assessment, will maybe do that. But I think I'd like to see that happen.
Yeah. Well, it has to happen, and it will. But like you say, I mean, it's kind of like looking. It's kind of like Jackie Robinson, right? It's looking for the right person at the right moment at the right institution.
I was going to say it's like a game of chicken. You go first. No, you go first.
Okay.
Jackie Robinson's a better metaphor. Yeah, no, but there'd be somebody like Stephen Barry, if he's at the University of Georgia. I mean, that's just an extraordinary project. So if he's not a full professor, he should be. I should go look. I think he actually is an associate professor. And this has been this. So maybe we should start. Maybe what we do is the AHA or the OAH starts to push around a set of specific candidates. I mean, maybe that's it. I mean, the AHA or the ASA seems to be more engaged with these kinds of issues than the OAH, which is just sort of the nature of the OAH, I think. I don't know why.
Yeah, I don't know why either. But let's go back to those years as dean.
Okay.
I was really struck. You must know Phil Deloria from your time at Yale.
I was on his dissertation.
So now he's a dean at Michigan, and one of the things he said was in a public forum on kind of exactly this, right, on the future of higher education. He was talking about his a kind of frustration that he has now as dean with his faculty because of what he sees as, I hope I'm paraphrasing this correctly, what he sees as a kind of narrowness of their own horizons that actually gets in their way of best fighting for their own cause. I wonder if you could comment on that.
Okay, I think partly what's happened is the way Rutgers' own position has that Michigan, by being Michigan, probably does have the luxury of that narrowness that's sort of been gone from Rutgers, at least since I've been there in 2000. Part of that is related to the New Jersey budget. Part of that is a push on accountability. What makes your work accountable to X or Y? It's not down as practical as it might be if I'm in nursing school, because the humanities is never going to do that. But there's a push. I mean, so I feel guilty. I'm going, why in the world am I writing about herpetology? How does this contribute? And so that little haunted voice has been internalized, and we have just been kind of under siege and a need to sort of account for ourselves and what we do. Probably more than Michigan, because we aspire to become Michigan. And this was back to what I was saying about my sort of crunch when I was trying to teach this course about how can I teach my students that they do have to do something so that they're writing a book that is, we're not going to change the world, but it's better than cleaning the refrigerator for somebody, and that we're going to offer something in return. I mean, American history is kind of annoying in its public face in a lot of ways, because it has only, it's really three presidents that matter: the mystery of Jefferson's mind, the mystery of Lincoln's soul, and the mystery of FDR's political gifts, and then only like four stories that matter: slavery and freedom, labor and capital, expansion and empire. Maybe only three. And that people keep going back to those stories. So if you're writing public history, it has to do, or war, you can write war. It has to do one of those kind of four major questions that people already want to know. So the luxury of narrowness. Okay, but wait, one other thing. I would celebrate useless things, and I mean, no doubt you have talked to Michael Berube, or you will talk to Michael Berube. He was amazing in his own kind of powerful Michael Berube way at this ACLS sort of presentation on the public face of the humanities, by talking about the humanities center that he runs and glorifying not just the practical but the useless, and that the sciences still have the power of being narrow, saying this may lead to a dead end. I may never find this thing, but I'm going to pursue it till I find it. What we need to do both somehow. I'm trying to think about what Phil was saying about his faculty being their own worst enemies by not. We have to be able to talk. I mean, some of us are good at it, some of us are not so good at it. And so maybe I go back to that model of a larger sense of you could have a class on Petrarch with 3 people, but you also have to have a class on Italian food with 90 people. So you have somebody who's a really good public face. And maybe we think of a more collaborative model of a university and a collaborative model of departments rather than every single individual competing against everybody else and everybody out there all the time.
Well, right. I mean, because, it stands to reason when you step back and think about it. When I'm advising graduate students as they're putting together their committee, I always tell them to make sure to understand that there are certain things that you will never in a million years get from certain professors, right? You're just not. So you're trying to put together a committee that really does, complements, and they work together, and they kind of, between the 3 or 4 of them, they kind of give you what you're looking for, right? That's what a university is.
Yeah, between the 3 or 4 of you. Yeah, but that's why I thought an honors dorm, this was also their little model at Rutgers. I wanted them to we sort of worked hard to sort of launch an honors college so that, your aunt can have boasting rights there at the honors college. But so that if somebody who's a physics major could live next door to somebody who is a, history major, that they could have conversations with each other rather than, because they get the business school all goes and lives together. It's the business school. They all go and live together, which just seems sad to me.
Yeah, well, it's that kind of creeping over specialization. To go back to Phil Deloria's, I think he was also speaking kind of in institutional terms. He was saying that there are certain things from the ground as a faculty member that you don't see or maybe don't get about the battles that you're engaging, and that it's easier to see them from the dean's office. And he kind of wished that faculty knew more of what he knew. I was wondering...
Yeah, I think he's exactly right.
Can you say, if there were a few things that you wish... as a dean, you wish your faculty kind of had a better sense of, what would be those things?
One would be it's a slightly different way, and it may be the same thing that Phil was thinking about. Less self-involved, maybe that's what he's saying about the narrowness, whether it's the narrowness of research or the narrowness of their own project, and a sense in which they're able to articulate, I'm going to do this in a couple of ways. One is where they fit in a larger scholarly project. I'm trying to think of some of my colleagues who say, okay, well, Rutgers is just scrappier. So, and Rutgers is also, to tell the local story, I gave this talk at Berkeley, the history department, a couple months ago, and I was fascinated by its own history of itself. It was talking about its own history. Rutgers is a series of temporary alliances. The way people talk about the history department at Rutgers, it's, that was when, X and X were here. And, and that was when X and Y and Z were here. It's just, it moves around in lots of different ways. Okay, so I guess what I've always tried to do is make people aware of each other's talents. It goes back to what you're saying about the repertory nature of the way American studies works. It really works that way really well. So you're really aware of each other's work. So I was trying, and I used to put together these committees in the dean's office because I thought that this person from English would really like to know this person from linguistics, who would really like to know this person from philosophy. And somebody accused me of making these promotion committees like a dinner party because I wanted them to know each other, because they really, they would like each other. So that doesn't answer the practical purpose, but that was a sort of push outside of the narrowness of your own research. But I'm trying to go back to Phil's thing, because if what Phil is saying is how you present your work to the public, that's a slightly different set of questions. So if you're taking somebody who's for a long time been working on, I don't know what, anatomy in Melville or something, for an example, and they are working on their scholarly monograph, are they obliged at the same time to figure out a way to present this either on the web or a series of blog posts? Is that what we're supposed to be doing? I don't know. Is that what we're supposed to be doing? Do you push your faculty to have their self a public kind of web-based presence in a major way?
No, but we do have a public humanities program that people can opt into, and I'm hoping, over time it will become more and more robust, and more people will want to be involved in it.
Yeah, we're trying to do that as well. Yeah,
and for a couple of reasons. I mean, the successes we've had so far are based on a couple of things. One is there is a general hunger among faculty and students to find venues for work outside of scholarly publication.
Yeah.
And there's a hunger for, as you know better than most, all scholarly work is creative work. But we're not often encouraged to think of it in those terms. And so to actually be engaged in something that is calling itself creative work is really a cool thing to do at a university. And so a lot of people have gotten involved for that reason.
Yeah, and we've been working on some kind of web-based assignments of kind of digital displays, so little museums and collections that come along as a piece of what the undergraduates are doing. And those are really fun. It's the creativity, it's the link of creativity and curiosity that I've always tried to preserve in my graduate students. That's what sort of drove them into this. So how do you hold that on? And to my undergraduates, the extraordinary undergraduates that I've taught, both at Yale and at Rutgers, they're amazing because they have this particular kind of drive and a willingness to take a set of risks. And the public humanities is one piece of it. Because you're offering something to the public. You're offering, it can be incomplete. It's offered there. And maybe that's a side of what Phil was saying, is that we have to think of multiple ways of translating our research. It's not just a practical policy side, which is often the easiest one, nor is it necessarily a scholarly monograph. And maybe that's the imagination, that it fits in between in a whole number of ways. And of course, on a small scale, it's talking to the public library, and
right.
And those are fun and are actually really important. And maybe it is also asking your faculty, which is something I'm not very good at because I'm old, to have a particular kind of constant web presence, which I just have. No, because I'm also kind of private, but I've just never done that kind of thing. But I think maybe that's also a luxury, and that if you want to do this well,
to not do it is a luxury, you're saying.
To not do it is a luxury. Yeah, to not do it is a luxury. That I have my 50 followers on Twitter, but I don't tweet anything very often.
Don't follow me. That's the only thing I've ever tweeted.
People come along and follow me from now. I'm going, where did you come from? And I once asked a question and had Dan Cohen and a lot of people answer it, which was great. I thought, I should ask more questions. Dan Cohen will answer them. But there are these people that are, and Meredith McGill, my wonderful colleague Meredith McGill, and I've tried to kind of nurse along a digital humanities projects at Rutgers, which has been just complicated because of the kind of strange structure of our university. But I think finally it's getting a tiny bit of traction. But it's really taken 4 years of, it's taken longer than that, of pushing this little ball up the hill. But it has its public humanities part and its sort of digital humanities part and its part in the English department and its part in the history department. And they are slightly different configurations of how this is going to work. I'm hoping we'll finally get it launched. But that, the humanities. The humanities is only one piece. I know you're probably talking to lots of other people, and it would be interesting to watch if there is a shared sense of crisis that runs through the social sciences and runs through the life sciences and hard sciences, or whether they feel like they're the golden boy of the moment, that STEM, or Earl Lewis gave this great talk that STEM used to be called SMET, actually, science, math, engineering, and some PR said, you can't call it SMET. I know, but I think we should go back to calling it SMET, and then we wouldn't feel quite so intimidated. But whether or not whether they feel like they've hived off a chunk of this and they're fine.
I think, we'll see. I don't know the answer to that. I do think that, I have glimmers of things from a very small sample that suggests that the issues that you and I are talking about are articulated in very different ways in different divisions but they do pervade all divisions.
Because the quantification of everything is going to be there for them, that even though they may be sitting pretty, they're going to have to worry about their numbers as well. So if your chemistry majors are declining, but nobody, I mean, I think where they're different is nobody's going to question the fundamental promise of what they hold out as a set of skills. That nobody is going to say, oh, you're a chemistry major, how terrible, or why in the world are you doing that?
Right.
Because it seems to promise...
You're taking too much chemistry.
You're taking too much chemistry. Yes, you can't have that sentence. That's a sentence that can't be uttered.
Right.
You're taking too much chemistry. I mean, I suppose you might have it on the level of organismal biology, say, although, the conversations now about extinction and habitat destruction have suddenly made organismal biology a crucial science. That, although, 25 years ago somebody said, why are you studying whole birds? What's the matter with molecular biology?
Whole birds.
But I would love to see what a scientist says.
Yeah, well, we will find out.
Yeah.
So ironically, so you've been really championing curiosity and the useless, which I appreciate and understand. But as on an ending note, I'm going to ask you to talk about the practical and the useful. You have, based on your experience over, going all the way back to Santa Cruz and what you've seen in the American university over the time that you've been inhabiting that kind of institution. Do you have any recommendations? You talked very eloquently about kind of the wall that you hit from the dean's office, that you just felt like, there were certain things you were not going to be able to accomplish. But now, stepping back and with this sense of perspective, are there things that you might recommend to educators who really want to maintain their grasp on the mission of the university?
One is a quality that I've never thought about before, but I'll just call it, for want of a better word, an intellectual generosity among administrators, which, you like to think that you're constantly balancing a set of competing demands for limited resources. I've often been struck by how much of the humanities you can buy for very little money. I don't want to make this a humanities-based point. I think the right kind of academic administrators actually can accomplish a lot because of the energy and enormous goodwill of faculty. And I think a piece of that has to do with our role as teachers. Because when you say, and you've done this too, and know that you teach an undergraduate course that spans broadly, those moments when it intersects with the research that you happen to be doing illuminate it with a different kind of light all the way along. And so that kind of research, and this applies to the humanities, and this applies to the social sciences, and it applies to the sciences, that there are these points where we actually are creating new knowledge or delivering new insights on old knowledge, which can only happen about research. But that research is intimately related to a piece of what goes on in the classroom. So whether you're advising a senior essay or a humanities research project, whether you're giving a big lecture, that the nature of the university as a teaching apparatus and the nature of the university as a research entity are intimately related. And I think the right kind of administration can understand the ways in which that intimate relation runs across your field. So whether it's hard material science, whether it's public policy, that the encouragement of that link, that link of the way, because I think pedagogy assures our generosity. I mean, it assures that, to go back to Phil's point, that we're never quite as narrow as we appear to be as we run back home like Kasaben and our narrow pedagogue, the narrow pedagogue. the narrow pedagogue is also called out in the classroom. That's where our accountability is, that our students are actually our public, that we keep talking about, what have you done for the public? But we have a whole face of the public there. And they are our public, and they are our teaching about. They are our customers in a creepy way, but they're our public. So I guess that's what I would do, is try to figure out how to articulate those links. That's what the university does, and that it's within those links that your students actually become thinkers. Because they're where, that's what we're supposed to be doing, aren't we? Making them thinkers. It's like a sequence of courses. And my daughter, who was an art and art history major, had a much easier time writing an art history senior essay because it was just a sequence of things. By the time she was doing her painting senior project, you were launched on your own. You were supposed to find something that was your own. But it's that moment that I think that we're sort of launching our students, and that's what makes them thinkers into the world. When they launch into thinking something for themselves, it's about growing. That's growing up, and this is how we grow people up in the States. I'm sounding so optimistic, really. I'm just old.
That's not a bad thing.
No, I just keep thinking I should quit. This is all I think about right now. And partly it's because I read the Chronicle. I should not read the Chronicle. That's my mistake, is that the Chronicle profits like any media from crisis. And so the Chronicle's going to gin up the crisis. So we're going to go back to gin up the crisis. Gotta get ready. It's got a crisis. Otherwise, what are we doing?
So the optimistic note is the crisis is being ginned up.
Yeah, that's my optimistic note. That we go back to work, we give them our syllabus, we make them read some books, and we go back to work, and off we go.
Everything's normal.
It's not. I don't think everything is normal, because they're going to say, I'm sorry, history's enrollments are down. You can't hire this person to do this. You can't hire this person to do that. And it drives it to say, okay, we're supposed to do a search in this. We can't do that. We can't hire, a South Asianist, because there aren't a lot of students who are going to take this class. So that spread of what a conversation should look like within a department, it's going to be limited, because we're going to say, okay, we got to get something that students want to take. I don't know what that is. Historian of war. So that, you see that it filters down into the searches, filters down into this. Yeah. I'm sorry, Matt. I'm sorry. I carry these things around. Nobody's ever asked me about these things before. It's like sometimes I tell my husband about them, and he goes, "I don't want to hear about them." But it's happening in law. I mean, he works for a big law firm. Even that,
Well, there is a huge piece of this that is. I mean, we talked about the momentum of the culture, and then kind of under the broad category. You mentioned Reagan earlier. The kind of the neoliberal period.
The neoliberal period. Yeah, it is. We are in the midst of the neoliberal period. But when does it end? I mean,
That's the question.
What happens next?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and your optimism.
Oh, no, I'm just ready to quit. I'm sorry. Thank you for doing this. Thank you. I hope that was it all. 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 I hope that was it all.